A couple of the primary network management protocols that we work with these days are CCNP, Simple Network Management Protocol, and syslog. And I thought for troubleshooting purposes, we would talk about them in the same video because they've got a similar set of reasons for why they may not be working appropriately. Let's remind ourselves of something that these protocols could do for us. Let's say, as an example, in this topology, that link between the internet and the router, that link goes down. And we need to notify someone about that. We can send a message, a syslog message, or an SNMP message to a server. And that router, if it's configured for syslog, could send a message out to a syslog server saying that this certain event happened. Or if we're enabled for an SNMP trap, we can send a trap message out to that server. And what we want to talk about in this video are some reasons why that might not happen. What are some common troubleshooting targets for SNMP and for syslog? First of all, we simply may not have connectivity to that SNMP or to that syslog server. That's a possibility. We could check that out with the ping. Can I ping the server for which I'm configured? If not, then I may have some sort of network issue and we could start troubleshooting network connectivity issues. It could be that the configuration in our router or in our switch is incorrect. We've specified the wrong IP address for our syslog server or for our SNMP server. And I'm going to take you out to a live interface in just a few moments, and we'll take a look at the proper configuration where we can go back and check and see if we have incorrectly typed in that IP address. Something else that could go wrong is that if we're dealing with syslog, we could have specified an incorrect syslog level. Syslog has different levels of severity. And if I specify a really high severity level, then I might not be sending messages that are just warnings or just informational messages. And as a result, I might not be getting all the messages that I really wanted to get. We're going to take a look at how we can set up an appropriate syslog level here in just a moment. If we're dealing with SNMP, we might have an incorrect SNMP version configured on our router. It's not matching up with what we have on the SNMP server. They need to match. We could have version 1, probably not in use today in your network. We might have version 2C, which is still very popular, or the most secure is SNMP version 3. And if we're using SNMP version 2C, that uses a community string, which is sort of like a password. This community string needs to match on the managed device like the router or the switch and the management server. Maybe we've got that typed in wrong. We'll take a look at how to properly configure that in just a moment. Or with SNMP, something else that might go wrong is that we're not receiving the alerts we expected because an SNMP trap is not enabled for that specific alert. You see, SNMP is sort of a push-pull model. We can have a server pull information from a managed device because inside of that managed device, we've got a collection of MIBs, MIBs, Management Information Bases. We might say, for example, tell me the temperature of your chassis. That's one example that we might get from a MIB. Or that device could proactively notify the server if something went wrong, like an interface going down, or maybe the temperature exceeding a certain threshold. That's a trap. We could send an SNMP trap. That's a notification to the server, and if we're not enabled for that trap, then it's not going to send that proactive notification to the server. Let's go out to a live interface right now and see how to set up both syslog and SNMP. Let's begin by reminding ourselves how to configure a router to point to a syslog server. First, I want to specify what severity levels are worthy to be sent to my syslog server. We'll go into global configuration mode and we'll say logging, trap, and I'll give some context-sensitive help. And you can see that we have 8 different severity levels. And the lower the number, the more severe the condition. The lowest number is 0, and that's a level of emergencies. That's a very severe condition, obviously. The highest number, the 7, well, that's the lowest severity level. And that's debugging. That's very verbose. It produces a lot of output. We generally would not use that on a regular basis. I would typically use something like a 4. A severity level of a 4 is also known as a warning. And here's a key concept to understand. If I say logging trap 4, oh, by the way, I could say logging trap warning, Cisco iOS will accept either the name or the number. But if I say well, let me just say a 4 to make this easier to visualize. If I say logging trap 4, I'm not saying only send severity levels of 4 to the syslog server. I'm saying send severity levels of 4 to the syslog server and more severe conditions as well. In other words, if I say logging trap 4, I'm going to be sending severity levels of 4 and 3 and 2 and 1 and 0. It's that level that I specify in more severe conditions. If we looked at the numbers and thought that, well, if I give a 4, that will send me 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's not the way it works. It's the number you specify and lower numbers. We want to make sure that we're specifying the appropriate severity level. And now that we've done that, let's see how to point to the server. To do that, we can say logging, and we'll say host, and I'll give the IP address of our syslog server. Let's say it's 192.168.1.50, and that's a basic configuration for syslog. Now let's take a look at SNMP. With SNMP, we'll just stay here in global configuration mode, and I'm going to specify the server, the version, and the community string. We'll say SNMP-server host, and we'll say it's the same IP address as we used before. I don't really have a server set up at that IP address, but we're pretending. Now I'm going to say, what is the version? And notice that there are 3 different versions. This would be a common point where we could make a mistake. This is a common troubleshooting target. Maybe our server is running version 2C. However, we're looking at this and we think, well, let's go with the best one. Let's go with number 3. That's the most secure. And we've got a mismatch. It needs to match up between your managed device and the SNMP server. I'm going to say that we're using version 2C, and we can also specify a community string, or if we were using SNMP version 3, we would specify a username here. I'm using version 2C, so I'm going to specify a community string which needs to match up on the SNMP server. Let's say it's capital C, and I'll say a 1 and a $sign and a lowercase c and a 0. We'll say that that is my community string that needs to match up. Well, now I've pointed to my SNMP server, but here's a common troubleshooting target. I've not enabled any traps. I've not told this device, this router, to send trap messages to my SNMP server. Let's see how to enable those now. We can say SNMP server, and I'll say enable, and we could specify an individual trap or traps. You can see as I scroll through, there's quite a few of them. If I just press enter, that enables all of the traps. And maybe you don't want all the traps. What you could do is you could go in and you could negate individual commands. Let me show you. Let's do a show run pipe to include anything that begins with SNMP -server. And we're going to see that there are lots of entries in our running configuration right now for these traps. For example, here's an EIGRP trap. If I didn't want that, I could simply go into global configuration mode and say, no, SNMP-server enable traps EIGRP. I could go in and surgically remove individual traps. But something else we get from the command that I just showed you, where we're doing a show run and we're popping the output to include any lines that begin with SNMP-server, we can see here down at the bottom, my host. There's the IP address of my SNMP server, there's the version, and there's the community string. This is something we might want to verify if SNMP doesn't appear to be working correctly. Let's make sure we're pointing to the right IP address, we've got a matching version, we've got a matching community string or a matching username if we're using SNMP version 3. Let's make sure that our traps are enabled. And here's a verification command for syslog. I could do show logging, and we can see, in addition to the actual syslog messages that appear on the console, we can see that I'm logging to this IP address, and the severity level that I'm logging is warnings, and we know that means warnings and conditions that are more severe than warnings. Well, that's a look at how we can configure and how we can verify some of the parameters that need to match up with both syslog and SNMP.